Welcome back to our match here of the modern Super League here. I got Reduke in the booth, and we got Caleb up against Jim Davis here. Reed, how are these hands looking?
Looks pretty good for both players, to be quite honest with you. Now, Caleb has one of those hands that I described, where it's like I'm going to develop my board. I'm
Yep.
going to have a couple good early turns, and then we'll see. But the Agatha's Soul Cauldron makes this hand pretty scary because it means if something along the lines of Grist, Yawgmoth, Port of Calling, Walking Ballista, if those show up like anywhere, hand,
Yeah.
top of the library, graveyard, anywhere, Caleb's going to be in business. On
Okay.
the other side, Jim can develop pretty well. He's even got the
The one of.
Gemstone Cavern on the draw. I suspect he's going to want to sort of take his time and maybe do like a Seasoned Pyromancer and then play the Shardless Agent on his, well, we'll call it his fourth land drop, which would be his turn
Sure.
3. But yeah, the interesting thing about the Glimpse deck is it's not like Rhinos where you just want to cascade at the first opportunity.
Yeah.
Sometimes the Glimpse becomes like a lot more powerful if you can take that extra beat to set up.
Yeah, I think you actively want to be waiting a little bit more with this deck instead of rushing it out there unless you're facing, a combo immediately, which we're not really going to see that aggressively. So, if Jim can get through such a much faster combo deck and so easily, may I add, in the first round, it feels like he's going to have a lot better time up against a Yawgmoth deck, wouldn't you think?
I think so. And yeah, Caleb was like, man, if I had known there was going to be so much combo this week, I might not have chosen Yawgmoth. He said he had another brew that he'd been working on. And yeah, I'm sure that, I wouldn't be surprised if Caleb like has some game in the matchup. Yawgmoth's pretty powerful deck as well, but he can't be happy with the situation that he just has effectively no counterplay against what Jim is up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So here we see Agatha's Soul Cauldron to start doing some things. And you can also just eat your opponent's stuff here. You can really get froggy if you want and start haywire miting away clues, something like that if you just want to lower the amount of permanents in play with, which, in Jim's deck, it is all about permanents. It doesn't really care what these permanents are until you've already glimpsed.
Oh, so okay, so he's going for it. He's not wasting any time with the Pyromancer. I guess it makes sense given that he didn't have any non-lands to discard with the Pyromancer. You might as well just get the ball rolling here.
Yeah, I like that as well. If that was two not so great cards in hand, maybe at 2 Furies or something, I think I would have liked Seasoned Pyromancer. But all right, here we go. We see for the 5 permanents, Seasoned Pyromancer got in play anyways, so no big deal. And a Fury. So not bad. I've seen this deck where it just looks absolutely amazingly powerful. And then another time where they put in 7 lands and you're like, oh, I submitted this deck, huh?
Well, I think Jim will consider this to be a good hit because Fury is really nice against Yawgmoth. And then the Seasoned Pyromancer gets to draw him towards, another Cascade card. And the untapped lands allow him to cast the other Seasoned Pyromancer from his hand. So he's going to see potentially as many as 5 new cards before his next untap step. So, he could easily just set up for an even more powerful Glimpse next turn.
Yep, makes sense to me. And the Agatha's Soul Cauldron does make Fury a little awkward where there's no scenario where you can actually get both creatures off the battlefield. So Caleb will get to save one of them. But they're not great creatures right now. So Caleb definitely is kind of in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and let's not forget the Gemstone Cavern, which just really let Jim like hijack the initiative in this game.
Yeah.
And he's starting to combo off at a position where Caleb is just totally unprepared. Like even with another turn, Caleb can't get Yawgmoth on the battlefield. He can't threaten his own combo. So Jim is just really doing it.
Would you consider that streamer luck?
Yeah, I mean, he had the 7-card hand, Gemstone Caverns. He hit well off the Glimpse. This is what he signed up for.
Yeah, I mean, you're a streamer as well. I'm a sub to your channel. You're quite the entertaining streamer as well as, being incredibly good at Magic. I'm sure you get that plenty of times where it's just like, oh, that's Reed here, just getting streamer luck.
Yeah, I'm known for my loose mulligan keeps, and then those times where I just keep the one lander and peel the second one right away.
Hey, we both tested with Seth plenty of times. I get it. All right, here we see the Aegis' Soul Cauldron. To give the abilities of Delighted Halfling to these creatures, play Blood Artist, play the Yawgmoth, and do the best you can. Now, the best you can, it's not great right now, but I was going to say the one hope is Violent Outburst could not be cast off these two caverns, but Scalding Tarn off the top, I think, means we're about to be in for the battlefield that I was not having the most fun seeing, which was 100 elemental triggers, but, you know, I bet Jim was having a lot of fun.
Yeah, so the main question is just what do you declare an attack before you cast the Outburst? So I would have been on probably like Scalding Tarn attack.
Sure.
And then, hey, even just the +1/+0 of Violent Outburst is kind of threatening here, especially if Caleb was to decide to let the Fury go unblocked. But
yeah, you can't do
makes
that
sense
though,
here.
right? Because then if you give those creatures plus, you're not getting rid of them with Glimpse of Tomorrow.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you'd leave like just Fury and you get rid of everything else, Glimpse is you can choose what you all get rid of, correct?
Well, you could certainly choose to not cast the Glimpse.
Yeah, but you can't take some of your cards and leave some,
No.
right? It is shuffle all permanents. Okay, so
Yeah, it's you fully warp the
wow.
world.
Is this no Violent Outburst?
I think maybe Jim didn't spot the mana issue that you pointed out, which
Yeah,
I would believe it because I didn't spot it until you mentioned it.
that's fair. So the one thing Caleb has to do is do not play Yavimaya right now. Not be great. Not be great. Didn't draw it. Kind of Jim may have got away with one, but even if you do draw either Cord or Yawgmoth here, it's still probably pretty tough to combo off, but shall see. Omnath on the top. Not exactly what you ever want to draw in this deck, I imagine.
Yeah, the cool thing about it is you could pitch it to Fury or Endurance.
Yeah. Good point. Very multifaceted on that aspect. So I guess going back while we set up this big turn, going back to game one of my match, did Jim have the endurance when he tried to Otawara my breach?
No, Jim was in tough shape that game because his plan was to end step Ottawara your Teferi and then try to go off, but then you started comboing, and is at least from my perspective, it wasn't obvious if there was a spot where he could Ottawara anything to break you up.
Yeah, there definitely was not, because he just always would have bounced the breach and then I replay it. But I was playing around Ottawara plus Endurance, so I wanted to get enough cards in my graveyard so I could do a bunch of bolts in response. But all right, so here we go. Glimpse of Tomorrow. This looks like an interesting hit. Maybe not extremely powerful, but we are going to get a bunch of Risen Reef triggers, but this is really missing an Omnath. Now, that being said, you can just cast this Omnath now with this mana base. Looks like at least, yeah, you got red. Yeah, and this is going to add enough mana, so you can at least play Omnath and then start fetching away lands to then create more elementals and create this overwhelming battlefield. So this should be good for Jim here, right?
Yeah, I agree with you that it's not the best that you could come up with, but I think just with this many permanents, it's going to be enough.
Yeah.
So he gets to see a bunch more cards. The Nissa is churning through landfall triggers. He can just cast the Omnath. Now, the important question is, like, does Caleb get even one more turn? Because chat pointed out something pretty cool, is if Caleb can get Walking Ballista into the graveyard, like, say, Court of Calling for 0, he can use Young Wolf to just kill itself over and over again, which will win the game with Blood Artist.
Oh.
Many pretty interesting combinations you can put together with Agatha's Soul Cauldron.
So Agatha's Soul Cauldron, when you were testing for PT Barcelona, Yawgmoth did not have access to that tool, and then I'm guessing you just have not really played too much Modern since it has been in play, since you've been testing for the World Championship?
Yeah, that's accurate. I'm excited to like experiment with Soul Cauldron and Yawgmoth myself. But to
Yeah,
be honest with you, Corey, I just watched the first couple weeks of Super League, and I was like, you know what? Like, there's enough people bringing Yawgmoth that I'll try to brew some fun and different decks.
there you go.
So maybe for a future week, I'll bring it out. But for now, I'll let Caleb do his thing.
Yeah, I thought for sure you were heading up the beanstalk, and I'm like, all right, I should have a good matchup against Reed. And I put Caleb on Yogg, and then Jim was complete wild card. I figured he wasn't going to play Scam, and I didn't put any of you on. Oh, excuse me, Rakdos Evoke. I didn't put any of y'all on that deck, and that's by far my worst matchup. So I was like, okay, we might be all right. But Prowess was another deck I was considering if I had enough time to get a little practice in with the deck, since I'm not very up to date on it.
Yeah, it was interesting with prowess because there's so many things you can do with it. I mean, I started out not even knowing like what color combination I wanted to play. So
Sure.
the new questing druid is pretty cool in the green based prowess decks.
Yeah, gruel based tend to just be a little more aggressive, and blue gives you a little bit more reach, probably better sideboard cards. It's probably just those two, right? Or were you considering another version of prowess? Or
Well, there's mono red, and there's like with mono red you could do Obosh. Then there's three color versions like Temur or Jeskai.
okay,
But yeah, I mean there's a lot of room to customize.
fair enough. All right, so just seeing another plethora of things going down. Fury to pick off Blood Artist. Now that does eliminate the line of walking Ballista for 0 and kind of going off that way. So now you look at the situation where, like, okay, maybe Jim can't win the game on the spot, but how can he lose next?
Yeah, I actually think it's almost impossible for Caleb to win
I think so,
from
right?
here because he can't get a second shot at his Blood Artist. He
There's just
does
no way.
not have endurance or a second copy of Blood Artist. So, normally that's okay with Yawgmoth because you can just kind of build out a big board and win with Grist and creatures. But this is not a board where Caleb's going to be able to overpower Jim for fairly obvious reasons.
I'd have to agree with you on that. I would have to agree with you on that. Yeah, gonna be pretty brutal here. But looking towards a sideboard here, does Yogg get anything really be able to interact with this kind of nonsense going on? I guess I'm seeing one card that seems pretty good.
Yeah, so the best one is Necromentia, which
Bingo.
Caleb has two copies of, and I think that's kind of just lights out. Or I shouldn't say lights out because Jim, of course, can just cast elementals fair and
Yeah.
square. But if he puts Necromentia on the stack, I think it's going to resolve, and Jim will no longer be able to combo, and that's that. So that
And
will
then
be
just has
his
to
dynamic
win.
in the game.
Yeah. Yeah, just has to win the fairway. And one way to kind of beat these Yawgmoth decks, and from my experience, at least maybe pre Agatha's Soul Cauldron, when I was playing a lot of just elementals, Omnath, Risen Reef kind of value style decks, is that game plan was perfectly reasonable. Fury is an incredible card against them, especially when they were playing, Birds of Paradise, a bunch more ignoble hierarchs. I think that dynamic has changed a bit, but the fair plan from this elemental deck doesn't look that unlikely that it could pull off a couple wins.
Yeah, it's true. So the way I would describe this is if Caleb has a good draw with Necromentia,
Yeah,
he will probably win the game. If Caleb employs a strategy where it's like, I'm going to mulligan to 5 or 4 looking for Necromentia, that's not going to work because then Jim can just win with the fair and square creature plan.
sure.
So that's what you have to look out for is like, is Necromentia going to come smoothly and conveniently when you can fit it in a nice curve, or is it like that's the only thing I have going for me?
Yeah, and kind of watching your career over the years, maybe being on a testing team with you, you don't really look for those kind of cards as like your first plan against these style of decks, right? The Necromentias, the Ley Line of the Voids, these kind of got you sideboard cards. Is that something that you try to avoid and you try to just play your deck's game plan, or are they like necessary evils in certain situations for you?
Oh, great question. I think it's context dependent. Like I certainly
Okay.
have used those cards before. what I really like is I like to have a cohesive game plan that's going to work, in a large portion of games. So one
Okay.
thing that I dislike about Necromentia, say you're against Temur Rhinos or something, is
Mhm.
if you're on the draw or if they have Gemstone Caverns, they can just combo before you even get to 3 mana.
Yeah.
So that's a big strike against it. There's also I remember like always wanting to use Necromentia against the Indomitable Creativity decks, but they
Mhm.
had Veil of Summer, so that's another strike against it. But here we see a matchup where like this is just perfect. Look at what's happening. Just turn 2 on the play, super smooth, and I mean Caleb effectively has gone from 50-50 to 90-10 in terms of his likelihood of winning the game.
Yeah, here it is. As long as you make sure and get that target right, don't go glimpse of nature or something. Glimpse of tomorrow is selected here. And now, not only are we playing a fair game here, Caleb gets to know exactly how Jim sideboarded, which, maybe not the biggest thing, but it definitely comes up. And now all of a sudden, we're looking at Jim Davis casting turn 3 Risen Reef.
So I'll tell you one interesting dynamic of seeing the sideboard plan is we have known deck lists.
Oh,
Jim has 4 Leyline of Sanctities in his sideboard,
sure.
which in theory, if Jim can start with Leyline of Sanctity, it stops the Necromentia plan.
Yep.
It stops Blood Artist, which this is a hot debate among the Yawgmoth crowd is whether you choose Blood Artist because it affects creatures on both sides of the battlefield, or whether you choose Zulaport Cutthroat because it cuts through Leyline of Sanctity and
One ring.
One Ring. But yeah, and so Caleb is like in a position where he's got these haywire mites. It's like, Jim's probably not going to have any targets for this, but in the world where he brings in Leyline, he can kind of punk me out with it if I don't have access to
Yeah.
one haywire mite. So now there's the, even deeper leveling game going into a possible game 3.
And I would ask you this question. I kind of already know the answer, but like at big stakes events, you're a household name on the Pro Tour. Do you tend to go for these kind of moments? These kind of like gotcha moments and try to pivot, or do you really like to just kind of stick to your game plan that you and the team like have figured out? Going through a sideboard guide meeting type thing.
Boy, another great question, Corey. So I'm a player who's like I do value preparation and having a plan.
Yeah.
So my favorite thing is if I just feel that I've identified the best sideboard plan that I can have. And in that case, I'm just going to stick with it, like rather than trying to feel clever or think I'm leveling
Yeah.
up with it.
Level yourself.
Yeah, level myself. But there are some situations where things are actually like close enough and where your opponent can adapt that it actually is worth keeping them guessing. Sort of like in poker, you'd call that balancing your range. And just
Sure.
being unpredictable, because if you do the same thing every single time, a sharp opponent can adapt to that and punish you for it. So there are situations that where both approaches can be ideal.
And I mean, if you want a masterclass in that, go to what, game 3 against Nathan Stoyer at PT Phyrexia? Is that was that it, or was it game 4?
Yeah, so you're bringing up a great example. That was creativity against Nathan, and I was chatting with my teammates. I was like, "Do you think I should try to combo him with the Xenagos Worldspine Worm instant win, or should I sideboard into Hullbreaker Horror so that I can take a more controlling route?" And we were like split decision on it. Like nobody really had a great compelling reason to do one or the other. And I was like, all right, well, I'll just kind of mix it up and keep
Go
them
back
guessing.
and forth. Yeah, and I think I remember that pretty clearly because, well, through my time of testing with Ely Cassis, one of your teammates now and, one of the best Magic players I know, usually it's a situation of just listen to him, like he's usually got a good grasp on things like that. And I think that is who you listen to on one of the
Yeah,
occasions for
no,
that, right?
Ely was like, I think I did exactly Ely's plan. He was like, show the Hullbreaker Horrors once and then just kill him with the Xenagos plan.
Yes, what a mad scientist.
Yeah,
Okay,
mad scientist. Yeah.
so getting, and maybe to a point where he leveled himself. I kind of liked your domain list a little bit more. Maybe don't tell him I said that. Hopefully he's not watching. So getting back to the game, we got Yawgmoth here getting in. Quarter Calling found Blood Artist as well. And looks like we're going to have a little endurance to do some blocking here. Not a bad exchange for Jim.
Yeah, so just to recap, everybody, this is the game where the Glimpse of Tomorrows have been exiled via Necromentia.
Yep.
So Jim is playing elementals. He is casting cards for 3 and 4 mana, trying to fight through. I think that this would work under some circumstances. Remember, we talked about like if Caleb has to mulligan to find his Necromentia, then Jim can capitalize. My prediction is that Caleb's draw is strong enough that he's going to be able to just win pretty cleanly in a couple of turns.
Yeah.
But Jim's fighting the good fight. I mean, he's got a board presence. He's churning through his library. He can even solitude, like if Caleb has to hard cast Yawgmoth. But Caleb kind of has everything perfect this game. He's going to flash in Orcish Bowmasters and have the unsolitudable Court of Calling to get Yawgmoth when he wants to.
Yeah, unsubtlety-able, that's for sure.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And just another card that really we just gotta, pour one out for the homies here is poor Risen Reef. Stock just plummeted with this old Orcish Bowmaster being printed. I mean, come on. They did Risen Reef dirty.
Yeah. The one tough. It's not a nice world for one toughness creatures in Modern these days.
No, it's not. But you know what? I'm gonna keep playing them. I'm gonna keep playing Ragavan until you pry it out of my hand, I guess.
Well, I said when you were playing against Jim, I said you got the one good matchup for Ragavan because your other opponents have either 4 Young Wolves or 4 Lava Darts.
I know. I was really like, I need to win this match against Jim. I was like, I really, really have to have a chance to advance to the top 8 because I got 2 rough matchups and 2 great players. So here's Yawgmoth coming down. And is it just over now? Pretty close?
It is. I think it's not over with just what Caleb has on the board, but it's getting close, and Caleb's going to get to draw about 10 cards here. So my prediction is that Jim's not going to get another turn. Yep, but the pattern here that you can look for is when you have Yawgmoth and 2 Undying creatures, you can go like unlimited. The sky's the limit how many activations you can do. If you have Yawgmoth and 1 Undying creature, then every other creature you have gives you 2 iterations of the cycle because you sack a Young Wolf, then you sack a creature targeting your Young Wolf to reset the counter.
Yep.
So here Caleb's, on the board, he gets something like 10, 11 triggers, and then he still has mana available to cast more creatures. He only needs to play a couple more creatures to get up to the, I think it was 16 life points that Jim had access to. But if he finds a Young Wolf or a Court of Calling, that's just easy mode.
Yeah, and Bowmaster, with that kind of thought in place, just adds 4 draw steps, if you get the Amass token and itself to go back and forth at Young Wolf. And then Agatha's Soul Cauldron probably does some stuff too here. We'll just let Caleb play with that cauldron.
It probably does some stuff. So you can use the cauldron to give creatures the ability to tap for mana. I think that's not going to be better than just casting creatures from his hand in this particular case.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could, because both creatures are summoning sick now. This Young Wolf is going to be going back and forth. So maybe if they were both good to go, you could Ignoble Hierarch on it and it kind of pays for itself or only costs 1. But yeah, as it stands, doesn't seem particularly strong. Now, the one thing Caleb does want to find here is just untap Black Source. That's probably pretty good too, though. So that's just it. Court of Calling for 1 here with Wall of Roots, putting a counter on that, and then tapping the 3 creatures. That's going to get a second Young Wolf, and that will leave Jim dead. And we're advancing to, or heading to game number 3. 2 close games, Reed.
So we have to see what's going to happen in game number 3. Is Caleb going to run hot enough to have another turn 2 Necromentia draw, or is this going to be one where Jim gets to leverage going first? I guess I wouldn't be surprised by any outcome, but it does seem like in the absence of that Necromentia, Jim is probably going to have an advantage in the game.
I would tend to agree too. And you gotta love it. I mean, I'm sure I think most of us kind of know your play style that you love, these Jund style mid-range decks. But winning a tournament, winning something like the Super League feels great no matter what. But when you win it with your baby, when your pet deck or some really, really fun deck that you're having a blast with, like Jim's definitely doing right now, it's extra sweet, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And then there's this other element of like your opponents, so you can kind of metagame like, oh, Corey's going to bring his Underworld Breach deck that he loves so much. But when Jim fires off Glimpse of Tomorrow, like, what are you going to think the next time you have to play against Jim?
Exactly.
Like,
See, I thought I got you all off my trail by playing Tron for week 1. I thought they're like, okay, Corey's put down Breach. He's never going to be playing that deck again. But it turns out I should have played 2 decks and then saved Breach for the finale, huh? I guess I kind of screwed that one up.
yeah, that's what I'm doing with Jund.
Gosh.
I've been kind of soft playing so far, but when I'm really trying to win, you'll know it because I'll bring Jund.
Yeah, Bloodbraid Elf will be in a 75 for sure. Oh boy. All right. That's the true Cascade deck. I think we both know it.
So it looks like Caleb mulliganed kind of a marginal hand in this game. He went down to 5 looking for either something a little more explosive or that Necromentia. Didn't find it. So this is Jim having some time to develop and set up, but Jim does not have a Cascade card. So
it doesn't even have anything meaningful to play on turn 3, kind of that Nissa or Risen Reef. That's kind of the ideal thing. So, it feels kind of bad to take permanence away from yourself in this deck by sacking a clue or something, but it just might be something we go for since Endurance doesn't look like that an attractive of a.
yeah, it's interesting. I wouldn't be surprised to see Jim go for the Endurance or go for cracking a clue. It kind of depends on his judgment of like how long he has to develop.
Yeah.
But this makes sense to me. You play the Endurance on turn 3, then at worst you can crack both clues on turn 4. And the game should be paced in such a way that you get a turn 5 to try to make something happen. Alternatively, Caleb did mulligan to 5. So if Caleb just has some kind of miserable draw, you could play a couple Endurances and a Fury and just start beating down.
Yeah, I like it. I like the plan that Jim took here, just being mana efficient, really. I think that was the large factor in just playing the Endurance here. Probably going to be the reason why we play another one. Also, there is some value of putting that Walking Ballista on the bottom of the library instead in the graveyard. That can be a little bit of a scary thing to see with the inclusion of a champion.
So cool moment there for Caleb. Now, he could have used Wall of Roots for mana to play the other Wall of Roots. Then he would get to pass with 2 walls and 3 lands untapped to be able to cord for 4. Now, I have not puzzled out what Caleb would want to cord for.
Now, Reed, sorry to interrupt you here, but do you think we're going to see it? The absolute train wreck here of double block and Fury to blow out both of them?
Boy, that could happen.
Plays around it looks like. Sorry to interrupt you. Feel free to make your point. I just thought we were about to see something devastating here from
Caleb's right
side.
to point that out to us. And then the end result was that Caleb actually blocked neither of them. He just took 6. So that's kind of a very conservative or passive style of play for Caleb, which does indicate to me that he has some kind of big plan for this cord and thinks that he can win sort of without worrying about the combat step in his life total.
Yeah, because this is just cord for 3, right? Like, that's not that great. Like, you don't even want to do that.
Yeah. So to circle back, he could have set himself up to have cord for 4 available. The downside of that is you kind of telegraph exactly what you have. Like in this situation, Jim could totally plausibly think that Caleb just has a bad hand. Whereas if you make the play of using your Wall of Roots and passing, then Jim knows exactly what Caleb's up to. It's also not clear what you want to cord for, and maybe you want to take another draw step, kind of waiting to see what the best move is. It's funny, like this is actually a spot where Sheoldred wouldn't have been that bad. Just like, let's get the single most powerful creature that we have access to, ambush one of these endurances, and then get to work. But I believe Caleb sideboarded that out.
Which makes sense to me. That doesn't seem like most of the time, unless you pair it with Necromentia, that kind of fair game is going to favor you. Now, the one thing that's kind of interesting from this spot here is Caleb did play an untap land here. So one thing that he's going to have available is if this, okay, so we're just going big Omnath. But if there were to be a Fury play where you go to like kill these Wall of Roots, at least you can Quarter Calling for Yawg in response and sacrifice that wall to then deal with a Risen Reef. But you might just be priced in and Yogging right now and killing Risen Reef before you get a bunch of triggers.
Yeah, so I think we're going to chord for Yawgmoth, sack the Dryad Arbor to kill the Risen Reef.
Love it.
Caleb thinking about exactly how he wants to use his mana. Does he want to have double black up for some kind of proliferate?
Yeah, I guess the big thing, or just a Bowmaster if you draw it. That's the cost, or having a 4 toughness creature to block one of these endurance. I think that's the big decision point here for Caleb. And nice thing, Caleb does not have to take any damage with that Peatland, as you can use it for Urborg if you, of course, already have the prerequisite 3 green. Yeah, really is taking some onus here on protecting his life total here with leaving both these walls open. Ooh. Punished immediately. Punished immediately.
Well, he might not be too disappointed to see that, because at this point, Caleb's like, all right, this is my big chance where Jim is tapped out and I have the Yawgmoth. So let me draw some cards and make something happen. And the Bowmasters, you just get to convert that into 2 cards. So
yeah,
pretty good start.
Still great. You know, could have played it at end step is the only thing I'm referring to. But yeah, this is Caleb's big turn here where you can just start Yawgmothing, right? Like you just start getting it going. See what you can find. You, of course, don't want to decimate your entire battlefield, but I wouldn't be too shocked to see. Oh, that's a great draw, too. Like Bowmaster, target the Omnath, and no matter what, kill the Omnath and start the turn over like that.
Okay, so often the first Chord of Calling winds up going for Young Wolf.
That would make sense.
Caleb is a little bit choked on his life total here. This is something that comes up with Yawgmoth, is it's a lot easier to win when you have 20 life than when you have 10. There's also, Omnath has a triggered ability that deals damage. Jim has a battlefield. So Caleb doesn't want to sacrifice a bunch of board presence, find himself at 4 life, and then be unable to win the game and die the next turn. So he's going to have to navigate like somewhat carefully and not just use all his life points without a care.
Now, the one thing that he has as far as of an advantage compared to playing against you last round is there's no reach from this this Glimpse of Tomorrow deck. There is no lightning bolts to the face that he has to worry about. We saw a situation where Caleb was very much considering stopping going for it because he had not found Court of Calling to get Blood Artist, and was really kind of taking his time, even though had the double Young Wolf, had Yawgmoth, but your deck just is so scary if you untap. You have that ability to just fire off a bunch of burn spells. Not the case here from Jim.
Yeah. I do want to recap. This is a game where Jim still has Glimpse of Tomorrow in his deck. So if Jim gets another turn, he's got a couple shots to find a Cascade card, and then anything can happen.
Yeah. I was like, what's the worst that can happen? And then some pretty bad things happen, Reed. It was not good.
Yep, I believe it.
I mean, this is awesome. If Jim goes just 2-0 with a deck that is largely not on the top 15 most played decks, I think that's a pretty safe assumption here. Would just be really incredible. But wow, that's not Young Wolf.
Yeah, so I'm guessing that Caleb is doing this because it lets him be a little bit, more carefree with his own life total. And then he might also think, well, I have for Young Wolves, I only have one Blood Artist. So let me cord for the artist and then give myself a few shots to draw into Young Wolf. It's not what I would consider like the default line, but I do believe that Caleb had some good and thoughtful reasons for choosing to do it this way.
Totally agree. So one option that Caleb does have is can just proliferate here to deal with this Omnath instead of getting rid of Blood Artist, and has double swamp thanks to Urborg. Probably better than getting rid of Blood Artist, especially since, well, Caleb can't cast a thing.
Yeah, so I have to say, Corey, Caleb he didn't get there this turn.
No.
He had some opportunities if the top of his library had been nice to him. But as it is, this is kind of the nightmare Yawgmoth scenario where you do wind up sacrificing a lot of board presence, not winning the game. Now, just with the cards we're looking at, Jim gets to attack for 6 and Fury away the Yawgmoth, and it's so challenging for Caleb to rebuild from there.
Yeah, and speaking of sacrifice, I think Caleb was getting some F6 value there, and F6 forgetting about the Omnath trigger, and it got to pick apart Blood Artist without it being activated to get a little bit more value. So Caleb thought the turn was over. I guess so did I until I saw that trigger on the stack. Kind of forget about that one. Modern All-Star, a 7-mana Omnath. Now this is bad news bears here for Caleb. I'm quite shocked here at how this last turn went down. And, you know, hindsight's 2020 and things would have happened that were different, but would you have went for Young Wolf there, or would you have went for Blood Artist?
It's so tough.
Yeah.
The game is over with Jim winning, so we're going to congratulate Jim on advancing straight to the top 8.